The cold bit deep that morning in Boise, Idaho, the kind of cold that doesn't just chill your skin, but seems to reach inside your chest and squeeze. January had arrived with a vengeance, painting the city in shades of white and gray, turning breath into visible ghosts that hung in the air for seconds before vanishing. Morris Hill Cemetery sat on elevated ground overlooking the Boise River Valley, its iron gates frosted over, its pathways lined with skeletal trees that clawed at the colorless sky. The Funa Malone Chapel stood at the cemetery's edge, a modest brick building with tall windows that let in harsh, unforgiving light, the kind that reveals every wrinkle, every tear track, every lie hidden behind a polite smile. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and old wood polish. Folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows, facing a closed casket of dark mahogany, its surface so polished it reflected the overhead lights like a black mirror. Owen Reed lay inside, though no one had seen him since the mortician sealed the lid 3 days prior. Heart attack, they said. Sudden. He was only 52, the kind of death that leaves questions hanging in the air, like smoke questions no one dares ask out loud because the answers might be too uncomfortable. Hannah Reed sat in the front row, her posture rigid, her hands folded in her lap with a precision that suggested years of practice. She wore a black dress that hung loose on her frame, as if she'd lost weight recently, or perhaps as if the dress had been chosen by someone else. Someone who didn't quite know her measurements. Her hair, long dark brown streaked with premature gray, was pulled back into a severe bun at the base of her skull, not a single strand out of place. The style aged her, made her look older than her 47 years, gave her the appearance of a woman who had learned long ago to make herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. She stared at the casket without blinking, her eyes dry. She'd cried herself empty 2 nights ago, alone in the house that suddenly felt enormous and suffocating at the same time. Now there was only numbness, a strange floating sensation, as if she were watching this scene from somewhere outside her own body. People filed past, touching her shoulder, murmuring condolences that blurred together into meaningless noise. "So sorry for your loss. He was a good man. If you need anything." The words washed over her like cold water, leaving no impression. Across the room, near the back wall, where shadows gathered despite the harsh light, stood Dr. Arthur Vance. He didn't belong to the usual crowd of mourners, wasn't family, wasn't a close friend of the deceased, wasn't even from Boise originally. He'd arrived in town 6 weeks earlier, drawn by a consulting contract with the Ada County Sheriff's Office to assist with interview techniques in a fraud investigation. 58 years old, with silver hair combed back from a high forehead and eyes the color of winter steel, Arthur had spent 3 decades studying the invisible language of human behavior, the micro-expressions that flashed across faces in fractions of a second, the subtle shifts in posture that betrayed hidden emotions, the unconscious gestures that revealed truth when words constructed lies. He observed the room with the quiet intensity of a naturalist watching animals in their habitat. He noted the widow's rigid spine, the way her fingers pressed together so tightly the knuckles had gone white. He saw the tension in her jaw, the slight forward tilt of her head, the posture of someone accustomed to making themselves smaller. And he saw something else, something that made his eyes narrow slightly. Every few minutes, Hannah's right hand would drift upward, fingers touching the back of her neck, just below the bun, a quick, almost imperceptible gesture before the hand dropped back to her lap, an anchor point, a self-soothing behavior triggered by stress, but also something more, a physical reminder of something, someone, some pattern of control. Arthur's gaze shifted to the man moving through the crowd with practiced ease. Cal Whitmore, late 50s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that seemed designed to inspire trust-warm brown eyes. A ready smile, silver-threaded hair worn slightly long in a style that suggested casual affluence. He wore a dark suit that fit perfectly, expensive but not ostentatious, and he moved from group to group with the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to being the center of attention. He'd been Owen Reed's business partner for 15 years, like co-owner of Reed and Whitmore Fabrication, a small but successful metal fabrication shop that served contractors and industrial clients throughout the Treasure Valley. Cal approached Hannah, bending down to speak softly near her ear. Arthur couldn't hear the words, but he watched the interaction with the focus of a surgeon examining an X-ray. Carl's hand rested briefly on Hannah's shoulder, a gesture that appeared comforting, but lingered just a fraction too long. Fingers pressing slightly, establishing dominance through touch. Hannah's shoulders dropped, her head tilted forward another degree. Cal said something, and Hannah's hand went to her neck again, touching the bun, the gesture automatic, unconscious. Arthur's jaw tightened. He'd seen this pattern before, in interview rooms and courtrooms, in the body language of victims who'd been conditioned over time to respond to specific triggers, anchoring Pavlovian conditioning applied to human relationships. Someone, Owen, most likely, had trained Hannah to associate certain gestures, certain topics, with submission, and now, even with Owen dead and cold in that polished casket, the conditioning remained, the invisible chains still binding her. Carl straightened, patting Hannah's shoulder once more before moving away. As he turned, Arthur caught something, a micro-expression that lasted perhaps 0.2 of a second. Carl's mouth curved upward at one corner, not in sympathy, but in satisfaction. The expression of a man who'd just confirmed something, who'd tested a hypothesis and found it correct. The look of a predator assessing wounded prey. Arthur had seen enough. He moved through the crowd with quiet purpose, accepting a cup of bitter coffee from the refreshment table, but not drinking it, simply holding it as a prop, a reason to be there. He positioned himself near the wall, where he could observe without being obvious, his mind already working through the puzzle pieces. The funeral service was brief and impersonal. A minister who'd clearly never met Owen Reed read generic passages about eternal rest and the comfort of faith. A few people spoke, Cal among them, delivering a eulogy that painted Owen as a dedicated craftsman, a loyal friend, a pillar of the community. The words were smooth, practiced, and Arthur noted how Cal's eyes kept drifting to Hannah during the speech, checking her reactions, measuring her state. After the service, as people filed out into the brutal cold, Cal approached Hannah again. This time, Arthur was close enough to hear fragments of the conversation. Double quotes, ... So much to handle, Hannah. The business, the accounts, the equipment, inventory, ... Nerp quotes. Cal's voice was warm, concerned, the tone of a helpful friend. I know this is overwhelming. I want you to know I'm here to help with all of it. Owen would have wanted, thank you, Cal. Hannah's voice was barely above a whisper, thin and uncertain. I don't know anything about the business side. Owen always handled, of course. Cal's hand found her shoulder again, that same pressing gesture. That's why I'm here. We'll get through this together. In fact, there are some papers, just inventory acknowledgements really, that we should handle soon. Legal formalities. I can bring them by the house tomorrow. Make it easy for you. Just signatures, nothing complicated. Hannah nodded, her hand going to her neck again. Okay, yes, thank you. Cal smiled, warm and reassuring. You don't have to worry about anything. I'll take care of it all. As Cal walked away, Arthur saw that micro-expression again, the brief flash of satisfaction, quickly masked, the pleasure of a plan proceeding smoothly. Arthur waited until most of the crowd had dispersed, until Hannah stood alone near the chapel entrance, staring out at the frozen cemetery grounds as if unsure where to go next. He approached slowly, his footsteps deliberate, giving her time to notice his presence without startling her. "Mrs. Reed." His voice was quiet, respectful. Hannah turned, her eyes unfocused, taking a moment to register his presence. "I'm sorry I don't. Do I know you?" "No, we haven't met. My name is Arthur Vance. I'm an observer of human nature, you might say." He paused, choosing his words with care. "I wanted to offer my condolences, but also to share something that I hope won't seem intrusive." Hannah's brow furrowed slightly, confusion mixing with the numbness in her expression. "I don't understand." Arthur glanced toward where Cal had disappeared into the parking lot, then back to Hannah. "Your husband's partner seems very eager to help you with business matters. Cal has been very kind." The words came automatically, a programmed response. "I'm sure he has." Arthur's tone remained neutral, non-judgmental. "Mrs. Reed, I've spent my career studying how people communicate, not just with words, but with their bodies, their faces, the small, unconscious gestures that reveal what they're really thinking and feeling. And I've noticed something about you." Hannah's hand started to rise toward her neck, then stopped halfway, as if she'd suddenly become aware of the gesture. "What?" "What do you mean?" "Every time someone mentions your hair, or business decisions, or anything related to your late husband's expectations of you, you touch the back of your neck, right where your hair is pulled tight." Arthur's voice was gentle, but direct. "It's an anchor point, a physical reminder of conditioning. Someone taught you, over time, to associate that touch with submission, with making yourself smaller, with accepting someone else's judgment over your own." Hannah's face went pale, her eyes widening. "How could you possibly?" "Because I've seen it before, many times." Arthur took a small step closer, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "And I've also seen the way Mr. Whitmore looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. The way he touches your shoulder to establish dominance. The way he smiled, just for a fraction of a second, when you agreed to sign papers tomorrow. That wasn't the smile of a concerned friend, Mrs. Reed. That was the smile of someone who believes they're about to get exactly what they want." Hannah's breath caught, her hand now fully pressed against her neck, trembling. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you're standing at a crossroads." Arthur's steel-gray eyes held hers with unwavering focus. "One path leads to signing whatever papers Cal brings you tomorrow, to letting him handle everything, to spending the rest of your life as a spectator in your own story. The other path," he paused, letting the silence stretch. "The other path requires you to do something that will feel terrifying and impossible." "What?" The word came out as barely more than breath. Arthur's expression softened, but his voice remained firm, carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Change your mindset, and life will change." Hannah stared at him, confusion and something else, something that might have been hope, or might have been terror flickering in her eyes. I don't understand what that means." "It means this." Arthur gestured subtly toward her hair, her posture, the invisible weight she carried. "Everything about the way you hold yourself, the way you speak, the way you automatically defer and diminish yourself, those are learned behaviors. They were taught to you, reinforced over years, until they became automatic. But they're not who you are. They're who you were trained to be." The words hit Hannah like a physical blow. Her eyes filled with tears that didn't fall, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Arthur continued, his voice carrying a strange mixture of compassion and challenge. "Your husband is gone. The man who conditioned you to touch your neck, to keep your hair exactly as he demanded, to believe you're incapable of understanding business matters. He no longer has power over you, unless you give it to him, unless you continue to live by his rules, even after he's in the ground." "But I don't know how to." Hannah's voice broke. "I don't know how to be anything else." "Yes, you do." Arthur's certainty was absolute. "You've always known." You've just been trained to ignore that knowledge, to bury it so deep you forgot it existed. But it's there, Mrs. Reed, the woman you were before you learned to make yourself small. The woman you could become if you chose to cut the anchor. Hannah's hand dropped from her neck, hanging at her side, fingers trembling. Cut the anchor, she repeated, the words foreign in her mouth. Literally, if necessary. Arthur's lips curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile. But more importantly, metaphorically, tomorrow, when Cal arrives with his papers, don't sign them. Ask to see the business accounts. Ask to see your husband's will, the partnership agreement, the inventory records. Ask questions. Demand answers. And if Cal tells you that you don't need to worry about such things, that he'll handle it all, that you wouldn't understand anyway, recognize those words for what they are: control, manipulation, the same conditionings you've been subjected to for years. He'll think I'm crazy. Hannah's voice was stronger now, though still uncertain. Everyone will. Let them. Arthur's tone carried no judgment, only truth. Mrs. Reed, I've learned something in my years of studying human behavior. The moment you stop performing the role others have assigned you, they react with shock, with anger, with accusations of madness. Because your transformation threatens their comfortable narrative. It forces them to confront the possibility that they, too, might be living in invisible cages of their own construction. Hannah stood silent for a long moment, the cold wind cutting through the cemetery, whipping strands of hair that had come loose from the severe bun. Her eyes remained fixed on Arthur's face, searching for something reassurance, perhaps, or permission, or simply confirmation that she wasn't losing her mind. Finally she spoke, her voice barely audible. What if I can't do it? What if I try and I fail? Then you fail. Arthur's response was immediate, unflinching. But you will fail as yourself, not as someone else's creation. And that, Mrs. Reed, is worth more than a lifetime of safe, small, suffocating success in a role you never chose. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a simple business card, placing it gently in Hannah's palm. My number. If you need someone who understands what you're up against, if you need someone who can read the room when Cal and his lawyers try to overwhelm you with jargon and pressure. Hannah looked down at the card, then back up at Arthur. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Because I've spent my life watching people be manipulated, controlled, diminished by those who understand the invisible language of power. Arthur's voice carried a weight of old pain, old battles, and because every once in a while I meet someone standing at the exact moment where everything could change, where one choice, one act of courage, could rewrite the entire story. You're at that moment, Mrs. Reed, right now. This conversation. He took a step back, preparing to leave, then paused. One more thing. That anchor point, the gesture with your neck. The next time you feel the urge to touch it, to seek that familiar comfort of submission, I want you to do something different. I want you to cut your hair. All of it. Not because short hair is better or worse than long hair, but because it will be your choice, your decision, your body, reclaimed from someone else's requirements. Hannah's eyes widened, her hand unconsciously rising toward the bun before stopping mid-air. Owen always said I had to keep it long. That short hair on women was inappropriate, masculine, that I needed to look like a proper wife. And now, Arthur's question hung in the frozen air. Whose rules are you living by now? Before Hannah could answer, Arthur turned and walked away, his footsteps crunching on the frost-covered path. He didn't look back. He'd planted the seed. The rest was up to her. Hannah stood alone in the cemetery entrance for a long time after Arthur disappeared. The cold seeped through her coat, through her skin, settling into her bones, but she barely noticed. Her mind was racing, thoughts tumbling over each other in chaotic succession. Change your mindset. Life will change. cut the anchor, ask questions, demand answers. The words echoed in her skull, foreign and familiar at the same time, like a language she'd once known but had forgotten how to speak. She thought about Cal's visits tomorrow, the papers he wanted her to sign. Just inventory acknowledgements, he'd said, legal formalities. But Arthur's words had planted doubt, had illuminated something she'd felt but couldn't name, the sense that Carl's helpfulness had sharp edges hidden beneath the soft surface. Hannah's hand rose to her neck again, fingers touching the tight bun, feeling the tension in her scalp from years of pulling her hair back exactly the way Owen had demanded. She remembered the first time he'd told her to change her hairstyle. They'd been married less than a year. She'd come home with a shoulder-length cut, feeling light and free, and Owen had looked at her with such disappointment, such cold disapproval, that she'd felt physically ill. "You look like a boy," he'd said. "A proper woman has long hair. My mother always kept hers long. I thought you understood that." She'd grown it out, and kept growing it, and learned to wear it in the severe bun that made her look older, more appropriate, more acceptable. And over the years, she'd stopped questioning it, stopped even thinking about it. It had become simply the way things were, the way she was supposed to be. But Owen was dead. The man who'd spent 15 years teaching her to be smaller, quieter, more compliant. He was in that polished casket, cold and silent and powerless. So why did she still feel his hand on the back of her neck, still hear his voice in her head, telling her what she could and couldn't do? Hannah pulled her coat tighter and walked to her car, an aging Honda Civic that Owen had always criticized as too small, too cheap. She sat in the driver's seat, engine running, heat slowly filling the interior, and stared at the business card Arthur had given her. Dr. Arthur Vance, behavioral analysis consultant. A phone number with a 208 area code, local. She thought about tomorrow, about Cal arriving with his papers, about the business read and Whitmore fabrication that she'd never been allowed to visit, never been permitted to understand. Business is men's work, Owen had always said. You focus on the home, that's where you're needed. But the home was empty now, and the business was half hers, wasn't it? Owen's half, which meant her half now. The thought was so strange, so alien, that it took her breath away. Her business, her decisions, her life. Hannah sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes, the engine idling, her breath fogging the windows, her mind slowly, painfully, beginning to shift. It felt like tectonic plates grinding against each other deep underground, pressure building, old structures beginning to crack. Finally, she put the car in gear and drove home. But instead of going straight to the house she'd shared with Owen for 15 years, she made a detour. She drove downtown, through streets lined with bare trees and buildings decorated with fading Christmas lights, until she found what she was looking for, a salon, still open despite the late afternoon hour, its windows glowing warm against the gathering darkness. Hannah parked, sat, stared at the salon entrance. Her heart hammered in her chest, her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, her fingers ached. This was insane. This was crazy. What would people think? What would Carl think when he arrived tomorrow and saw, "Change your mindset. Life will change." Hannah released the steering wheel, turned off the engine, opened the door. The cold hit her like a slap, but she welcomed it, the sharp clarity of sensation, the proof that she was alive, that she could feel, that she could choose. She walked into the salon. A young woman with purple streaks in her hair looked up from behind the counter, smiling. "Hi, do you have an appointment?" "No." Hannah's voice was steady, stronger than she expected. "But I need to cut my hair. All of it." The stylist's eyebrows rose slightly. "Like a pixie cut, or shorter?" Hannah's hand went to the bun, fingers trembling as they pulled out the pins, letting the long, dark hair fall around her shoulders. "I want it gone, all of it, as short as you can make it." The stylist studied her for a moment, and Hannah saw understanding flicker in her eyes, the recognition of a woman making a statement, reclaiming something. "Okay," she said softly, "let's do it." An hour later, Hannah stood in front of the salon mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. Her hair was cropped close to her skull, almost buzzed, revealing the shape of her head, the line of her jaw, the strength in her features that had been hidden for so long. She looked younger, harder, more real. She looked like herself. The stylist stood behind her, smiling. "Are you okay?" Hannah touched her head, feeling the unfamiliar shortness, the freedom of it, the lightness. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling, a genuine smile that felt like it might crack her face open. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'm okay." She paid, tipped generously, and walked out into the night. The cold wind hit her bare head, shocking and exhilarating. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and absolutely, terrifyingly alive. When she arrived home, she didn't go inside immediately. She sat in the driveway, looking at the house, a modest ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place that looked safe and normal and utterly ordinary. Owen's house, Owen's rules, Owen's world, but Owen was gone. Hannah got out of the car and walked inside. The house was dark, silent, filled with the ghost of a man who'd controlled every aspect of her existence. She turned on lights, moving from room to room, seeing everything with new eyes. The furniture Owen had chosen, the colors he'd approved, the photographs on the walls, always of them together. Always with her hair long and pulled back, always with her smile careful and controlled. She went to the bedroom, to the closet where Owen's clothes still hung. She pulled out a box from the top shelf, a box she'd hidden there years ago, filled with things Owen had forbidden: sketchbooks, colored pencils, watercolor paints. She'd loved art once, before Owen had told her it was a waste of time, that she needed to focus on being a proper wife, that creative pursuits were selfish and frivolous. Hannah carried the box to the kitchen table and opened it. Sketchbooks were old, the pages yellowed, but the drawings were still there, landscapes, portraits, abstract designs that had poured out of her in the early years of her marriage, before she'd learned to suppress that part of herself. She sat at the table, running her fingers over the drawings, and something inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for 15 years, began to crack open. Tomorrow, Cal would arrive with his papers. Tomorrow, she would have to face the business, the accounts, the reality of her new situation. Tomorrow, everything would be complicated and difficult and possibly terrifying. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Hannah Reed felt like herself, and that was enough. The next morning arrived with the kind of pale sunlight that makes everything look washed out and fragile. Hannah awoke at dawn, her hand instinctively reaching for the long hair that was no longer there, fingers touching bare scalp and stopping, confused, before memory flooded back. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, and walked to the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at her still looked like a stranger. The cropped hair, the exposed features, the rawness of it all. In the harsh morning light, she could see every line on her face, every mark of the years she'd spent shrinking herself. But she could also see something else, a clarity in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a set to her jaw that suggested determination rather than defeat. She showered, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater clothes Owen had always criticized as too casual, too masculine, and made coffee. Her hands shook slightly as she poured, the reality of what she'd done settling over her like a weight. Cal would be here in 2 hours. Cal, who expected to find the same compliant, confused widow he'd spoken to yesterday. Cal, who had papers for her to sign, papers that were just formalities. Hannah set down her coffee cup and picked up the business card Arthur Vance had given her. She stared at it for a long moment, then pulled out her phone and dialed before she could talk herself out of it. He answered on the second ring. Vance. Dr. Vance, this is Hannah Reed. We spoke yesterday at the funeral. Her voice was steadier than she felt. Mrs. Reed. There was no surprise in his tone, as if he'd been expecting her call. How can I help you? Carl Whitmore is coming to my house this morning with papers he wants me to sign. He says they're just inventory acknowledgements, but after what you said yesterday, double quote, she trailed off, unsure how to articulate the knot of fear and suspicion in her gut. But you don't trust him. Arthur's voice was calm, matter of fact. Good, that's the first step. What time is he arriving? 9 o'clock. I can be there at 8:30. If you'd like a second set of eyes on whatever he brings. Hannah felt a rush of relief so intense it made her dizzy. Yes, please. I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know what questions to ask. You'll learn. There was something in Arthur's voice, not quite warmth, but a kind of solid assurance. What's your address? She gave it to him, and he promised to arrive shortly. After hanging up, Hannah walked through the house, seeing it differently now. This wasn't just Owen's domain anymore. This was her home, her space, her territory to defend. At 8:20, a dark blue sedan pulled into her driveway. Arthur Vance emerged, dressed in dark slacks and a charcoal sweater under a wool coat, carrying a leather briefcase. He looked exactly as he had yesterday, composed, observant, radiating quiet competence. Hannah opened the door before he could knock. He paused on the threshold, his steel-grey eyes taking in her appearance. The cropped hair, the casual clothes, the subtle shift in her posture, and nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and approval. You cut the anchor, he said simply. I did. Hannah touched her head self-consciously. Everyone's going to think I've lost my mind. Everyone is going to realize you've found it. Arthur stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the interior with professional assessment. May I see your husband's office? Any business documents you have access to? Hannah led him to the small room Owen had used as a home officer, space she'd been forbidden to enter without permission. It felt transgressive even now, opening the door, turning on the light, allowing a stranger inside. The room was neat, organized, dominated by a heavy desk and filing cabinets. Arthur set his briefcase down and began methodically examining the contents of the desk drawers and files. He worked quickly but thoroughly, pulling out documents, scanning them, making notes on a small pad. Hannah watched, feeling useless and overwhelmed. What are you looking for? She asked. Patterns, discrepancies, anything that suggests your husband's business relationship with Cal Whitmore wasn't as straightforward as it appeared. Arthur pulled out a folder labeled Partnership Agreement and flipped through it. His expression didn't change, but Hannah saw his jaw tighten slightly. Mrs. Reed, according to this agreement, your husband owned 51% of Reed and Whitmore Fabrication. Cal owned 49%, which means you now own the controlling share. Hannah felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. What? Controlling share. Majority ownership. The business is legally yours to run, yours to sell, yours to dissolve. Cal can't make any major decisions without your approval. Arthur looked up from the document, his eyes sharp. Does Cal know this? I don't. I have no idea. Owen never discussed business with me. Never. Then we're about to find out whether Cal is genuinely trying to help you, or whether he's been counting on your ignorance to manipulate you into signing away your rights. Arthur checked his watch. He'll be here in 15 minutes. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to let him in, offer him coffee, and listen to whatever he has to say. I'm going to observe. I won't speak unless necessary. I want to see how he reacts to my presence, to your appearance, to any questions you ask. Understood. Hannah nodded, her mouth dry. What questions should I ask? Start simple. Ask to see the business accounts. Ask about outstanding contracts, pending orders, equipment inventory. Ask about the partnership agreement and what happens to Owen's share now that he's gone. Watch how he responds, not just what he says, but how he says it. Body language doesn't lie, Mrs. Reed. Words do. At precisely 9 o'clock, Cal Whitmore's silver Lexus pulled into the driveway. Hannah watched through the window as he emerged, dressed in expensive casual wear-pressed khakis, a cashmere sweater, leather jacket. He carried a slim briefcase and wore the same warm, trustworthy expression he'd had at the funeral. Hannah opened the door before he could ring the bell. Cal's smile was already in place, ready to comfort and reassure, but it froze when he saw her. His eyes widened, traveling from her cropped hair to her casual clothes to her face, which no longer held the numb compliance of yesterday. Hannah. His voice was carefully controlled, but Hannah saw the micro-expression Arthur had taught her to watch for, the brief flash of shock and displeasure before the mask of concern slid back into place. You ... You cut your hair. I did. Hannah's voice was steady. Come in, Cale. He stepped inside, his eyes still fixed on her head, and then he saw Arthur standing in the living room, and everything about his body language changed. His shoulders tensed, his smile became fixed, his hand tightened on the briefcase handle. Cal, this is Dr. Arthur Vance. He's a consultant helping me understand the business situation. Hannah was amazed at how calm she sounded, how the words came out clear and firm. Cal's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing Arthur with the wariness of a predator encountering an unexpected obstacle. A consultant. I wasn't aware you'd hired anyone, Hannah. That seems ... premature. We haven't even sorted through Owen's affairs yet, which is exactly why I'm here. Arthur's voice was pleasant, neutral, giving nothing away. Mrs. Reed wanted someone with experience in business transitions to help her navigate the complexities. I'm sure you understand. Cal's jaw worked for a moment, then he forced another smile. Of course. Though I have to say, Hannah, I'm a bit hurt. I told you I'd handle everything. You don't need to pay some stranger when I'm right here, ready to help. I appreciate that, Cal. Hannah gestured to the couch. Please sit. Can I get you coffee? No, thank you. Cal sat, but his posture was rigid, defensive. He set the briefcase on the coffee table, but didn't open it. Hannah, I have to ask, what's going on? The hair, the consultants, this whole ... attitude. You seem different. My husband died 3 days ago. Hannah remained standing, a subtle power position that Arthur had suggested. I think different is appropriate. Cal's expression flickered, frustration quickly masked. Of course, I didn't mean to suggest. I'm just concerned about you. This doesn't seem like you. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think. The words came out before Hannah could stop them, and she saw Arthur's slight nod of approval from the corner of her eye. Cal's face hardened for just a moment before the warm mask returned. All right, well, I brought the documents we discussed, just some basic inventory acknowledgements, transfer of equipment titles, that sort of thing. Simple formalities to make sure everything is properly documented. He opened the briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers, setting them on the table. Arthur moved closer, his presence suddenly more pronounced. May I? Cal hesitated, his hand hovering protectively over the papers. These are really just between Hannah and me. As partners in the business, I'm not a partner. Hannah's voice cut through the room like a blade. Owen was the partner. I'm the owner, 51% owner, according to the partnership agreement, which makes these documents very much my business, and anyone I choose to consult with. The silence that followed was electric. Cal's face went through a rapid series of expressions, shock, anger, calculation, before settling on forced calm. You've been looking through Owen's files. They're my files now. Hannah felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in years. Power, control, the sense that she had every right to be exactly where she was, doing exactly what she was doing. Arthur picked up the papers and began reading through them with methodical care. Hannah watched Cal's face as Arthur worked. She saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched, the slight forward lean of his body, aggressive posture, barely contained, and she saw something else, something that made her blood run cold. When Carl thought neither she nor Arthur was looking directly at him, his expression shifted into something ugly, something that looked very much like contempt. After several minutes, Arthur set the papers down and looked at Cal with an expression of mild curiosity. "These aren't inventory acknowledgements, I'm sorry." Cal's voice was tight. "These documents," Arthur tapped the stack, "they're transfer agreements. Specifically, they transfer Mrs. Reed's 51% ownership of Reed and Whitmore Fabrication to you, in exchange for a one-time payment of $50,000 and the forgiveness of alleged business debts that Mrs. Reed supposedly owes the company." Hannah felt the room spin. "What?" Cal's mask finally cracked. "Now wait just a minute." "No, you wait." Arthur's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "These documents also include a non-compete clause that would prevent Mrs. Reed from starting any similar business in the state of Idaho for 10 years, and they require her to vacate the business premises, which I assume means the fabrication shop, within 30 days, taking nothing with her except personal effects, a term conveniently left undefined. Those are standard business provisions," Cal started. "For a hostile takeover, perhaps." Arthur's eyes were cold. "Not for helping a grieving widow, and certainly not when presented as simple formalities and inventory acknowledgements. That's called fraud, Mr. Whitmore. Fraud by misrepresentation." Cal stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "Who the hell do you think you are? Coming into a private business matter, making accusations. I think I'm someone who recognizes a predator when I see one." Arthur's voice never rose, never wavered. "You've been planning this since before Owen died, haven't you? Waiting for the right moment, counting on Hannah being too grief-stricken, too conditioned to obedience, too convinced of her own incompetence to ask questions. You were going to take her business for a fraction of its worth, and she would have thanked you for it. Get out." Cal's voice was shaking with rage. "Get out of this house right now, or I'll call the police. Please do." Arthur pulled out his phone. "I'm sure they'd be very interested in these documents, especially the forged signature on page 7. Cal went white. "What are you talking about?" Arthur held up one of the pages, pointing to a signature line. "This is supposedly Owen Reed's signature, dated 2 weeks ago, acknowledging business debts that Hannah allegedly owes. But look at the ink." He tilted the page so the light caught it. "It's a different shade than the printed text. And if you look closely at Cal's thumb," he gestured, and Hannah saw it. A faint smudge of blue ink on Cal's right thumb, the same shade as the signature. "You prepared this document recently, very recently, probably last night after the funeral, when you were confident Hannah would sign without reading." Cal's hand moved to his pocket, an unconscious gesture of self-protection. His eyes darted between Arthur and Hannah, calculating, searching for an exit strategy. "This is insane. You're both insane. Hannah, you can't possibly believe. I believe you tried to steal my business." Hannah's voice was quiet, but it carried absolute conviction. "I believe you've been planning this for a while. I believe you thought I was stupid, too weak, too well-trained to ever question you. Hannah, please." Cal's tone shifted, becoming pleading, desperate. "You don't understand the business. You'll run it into the ground. Owen knew that. He told me 100 times that you couldn't handle this kind of responsibility. I'm trying to save you from yourself. And it was the truth beneath the lies. The same conditioning Owen had used for 15 years, now weaponized by his business partner. You're not capable. You don't understand. You need me to save you from yourself." Hannah felt something inside her crystallize into diamond-hard certainty. "Get out of my house, Cal. You're making a huge mistake. Get out." The words exploded from her, 15 years of suppressed rage and pain, and suffocated, self-channeled into 2 syllables that seemed to shake the walls. Cal grabbed his briefcase, his face twisted with fury and thwarted greed. "You'll regret this. That business will fail without me. You'll come crawling back, begging me to take it off your hands, and I won't be offering 50,000 then. I'll offer nothing. Then I'll have nothing." Hannah walked to the door and opened it, cold air rushing in. "Which is still more than what you were offering me today." Cal stormed out, and Hannah slammed the door behind him hard enough to rattle the frame. Then she stood there, shaking, her breath coming in gasps, adrenaline flooding her system. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Arthur's hand touched her shoulder lightly, a gesture of support rather than control. "Breathe, Mrs. Reed. You're all right. You did well." Hannah turned to face him, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling, a fierce, wild smile that felt like breaking free from chains. He was going to steal everything. Yes, he was. Arthur's expression was grim. "And he would have succeeded if you hadn't cut your hair." Hannah laughed, a sound somewhere between hysteria and triumph. "My hair saved my business. Your choice saved your business," Arthur corrected gently. "The hair was just the visible symbol of that choice. The moment you decided to stop living by someone else's rules, everything else became possible." Hannah sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly weak. "What do I do now? I don't know anything about running a fabrication shop. I don't know the clients, the equipment, the contracts. Cal was right about that much. I'll probably fail. Probably." Arthur sat across from her, his expression serious. "Most new business owners fail, especially in industries they don't know. But you won't fail because you're incompetent or incapable. You'll fail, if you do, because you're learning. And learning means making mistakes. The question is, would you rather fail as yourself, building something of your own, or succeed as someone else's puppet, living a safe, small life that isn't really yours?" Hannah thought about the sketchbooks in the kitchen, the art she'd abandoned because Owen had told her it was frivolous. She thought about the years of making herself smaller, quieter, less. She thought about the woman in the mirror this morning, with her cropped hair and clear eyes. "I'd rather fail as myself," she said quietly. "Good." Arthur stood, picking up his briefcase. "Then here's what you're going to do. Today, right now, you're going to go to Reed and Whitmore Fabrication. You're going to walk in as the majority owner and introduce yourself to the employees. You're going to ask to see the books, the current contracts, the equipment, inventory. You're going to learn everything you can as fast as you can. And when you don't understand something, you're going to ask questions until you do. Cal will be there." Hannah's voice was small. "Yes, he will. And he'll try to intimidate you, to undermine you, to convince the employees that you're incompetent, which is why you're not going to engage with him. You're going to ignore him completely and focus on the work, the business, the reality of what you now own. Can you do that?" Hannah stood, her legs still shaky but holding. "I don't know, but I'm going to try. That's all anyone can do." Arthur walked to the door, then paused. "Mrs. Reed, honey, one more thing. That fabrication shop, it's not just a business, it's a test. A test of whether you meant what you did yesterday when you cut your hair, whether you're willing to follow through on the choice you made. The anchor is cut, but you still have to learn to swim. Understand?" Hannah nodded, not trusting her voice. Arthur left, and Hannah stood alone in her living room, in the house that was slowly becoming hers rather than Owen's ghost. She looked at the clock, 10:15 in the morning. The fabrication shop opened at 7, which meant people had been working for over 3 hours. Her employees, her business, her responsibility. She grabbed her coat and keys, paused at the mirror by the door to look at herself one more time. The cropped hair, the determined expression, the woman she was becoming, and walked out into the pale winter sunlight. Reed and Whitmore Fabrication was located in an industrial area on the outskirts of Boise, a large metal building surrounded by equipment yards and other manufacturing facilities. Hannah had driven past it countless times over the years, but had never been inside. Owen had been very clear. The shop was his domain, not hers. She pulled into the parking lot, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Cal's silver Lexus was already there, parked in the spot marked owner. Hannah parked next to it, in the spot that had presumably been Owen's, and sat for a moment, gathering courage. Through the building's windows she could see movement, people working, machines running, the ordinary operation of a business she knew nothing about. Her business. Hannah got out of the car and walked to the front entrance. The door was unlocked. She stepped inside into a small office area desk, filing cabinets, a coffee maker, walls covered with safety posters and production schedules. Beyond a second door, she could hear the sounds of the shop floor, grinding, welding, the clang of metal on metal. A young woman sat at the desk, maybe 25, with her hair in a ponytail and grease stains on her jeans. She looked up as Hannah entered, and her eyes widened. "Oh my God, Mrs. Reed." "Yes." Hannah's voice came out stronger than she felt. I'm here to see the shop, to understand the business." The young woman stood quickly, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I'm Jess Kowalski. I do the administrative work, scheduling, invoicing. I'm so sorry about Mr. Reed. He was a good boss." Hannah nodded, not trusting herself to comment on Owen's qualities as a boss, when she'd never been allowed to see that side of him. "Thank you, Jess. Can you show me around?" Sure, but... quotes. Jess glanced toward the shop floor, uncertainty on her face. "Mr. Whitmore is here. He said he's taking over operations now that Mr. Reed is gone. He said you wouldn't be involved in the business side of things." Mr. Whitmore was mistaken. Hannah kept her voice level. "I own 51% of this company, which makes me the majority owner and the person who decides who runs operations. Is that clear?" Jess's eyes went even wider, but Hannah saw something else in her expression, something that might have been relief, or hope, or simply surprise that someone was finally standing up to Carl. "Yes, ma'am. Crystal clear. Good. Now please show me the shop floor." Jess led Hannah through the second door into the fabrication area. It was enormous, a high-ceiling space filled with equipment Hannah couldn't name, massive machines for cutting and bending metal, welding stations with bright blue flames, racks of raw materials and finished products. 4 men worked at various stations, all of them looking up as Hannah entered. And there, near the back of the shop, stood Cal Whitmore, talking to an older man with gray hair and a weathered face. Cal's expression when he saw Hannah was pure venom, quickly masked but not quickly enough. "Hannah." His voice carried across the shop floor, loud enough for everyone to hear. "What are you doing here?" "Learning my business." Hannah walked further into the shop, her footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. She was terrified, but she kept walking, kept her head up, kept her voice steady. Cal strode toward her, his face flushed. "This isn't appropriate. This is a working shop floor. There are safety protocols, insurance issues. Then get me the safety protocols and insurance documents so I can review them." Hannah stopped walking, standing her ground. "I'm the majority owner, Cal. This is my shop. These are my employees, and I have every right to be here." The shop had gone silent. Every person was watching, waiting to see how this confrontation would resolve. Cal's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You don't know the first thing about fabrication. You'll get yourself hurt, or worse, you'll interfere with production and cost us contracts. I knew you couldn't handle this. That's why he kept you away. Owen's dead." The words came out flat, final, and his rules died with him. "Now, you can either help me learn this business, or you can get out of my way." but you will not speak to me like I'm a child who needs to be managed. Not anymore." The older man Cal had been talking to stepped forward, a slight smile on his weathered face. "Mrs. Reed, I'm Tom Brennan. I've been the shop foreman here for 12 years. If you want to learn the business, I'd be happy to show you around, explain what we do." Hannah felt a rush of gratitude, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you, Tom. I'd appreciate that very much." For the next 2 hours, Tom walked Hannah through the shop, explaining each piece of equipment, each process, each current project. He showed her the custom brackets they were fabricating for a local construction company, the specialized parts for agricultural equipment, the repair work they did for industrial clients. He introduced her to the other employees, Mike, who handled the CNC machines, David, the welder, and young Carlos, who was learning the trade as an apprentice. Hannah asked questions constantly, filling a notebook with information, taking photos of equipment and work orders, slowly building a mental picture of how the business operated. And, as she learned, she began to see something Owen had never allowed her to know. This business was successful not because of Cal's management, but because of the skill and dedication of the workers. Tom, Mike, David, Carlos. They were craftsmen, taking pride in their work, delivering quality products on time. Cal watched from a distance, his expression growing darker by the minute. Finally, as Hannah was examining a set of blueprints for a custom order, he approached. "We need to talk, privately." His voice was low, dangerous. Hannah looked up from the blueprints. "Anything you need to say to me can be said in front of Tom." "Fine." Cal's jaw was tight. "You're playing a dangerous game, Hannah. You think you can just walk in here and take over? You think these men will respect you? You're a joke. A widow playing dress-up in her dead husband's world. And when you failed, and you will fail, don't come crying to me." Tom stepped forward, his voice hard. "Mr. Whitmore, that's enough. Stay out of this, Tom." Cal's eyes never left Hannah's face. "This is between me and the woman who's about to destroy everything Owen and I built." Hannah felt the eyes of every person in the shop on her. This was the moment. The test Arthur had warned her about. She could back down, apologize, retreat to the safe role of grieving widow who didn't understand business. Or she could stand her ground and accept whatever consequences came. She thought about the hair she'd cut, the anchor she'd severed, the woman in the mirror who'd looked back at her with clear, determined eyes. "Tom," she said, her voice calm and clear, "what's our most urgent current order?" Tom blinked, surprised by the question. We've got a rush job for Mountain West Climate Control. They need 40 custom aluminum mounting brackets for an emergency HVAC installation at a senior living facility. Their regular supplier fell through, and they're desperate. It's due in 48 hours. Can we do it? Hannah asked. "Yes, ma'am. We've got the materials, the specs are straightforward, and we've done similar work before. But it'll require overtime, and Mr. Whitmore said we couldn't authorize it." Hannah cut him off. "Whatever overtime is needed. That senior living facility needs climate control, which means elderly people need us to deliver. Make it happen." Tom's face split into a genuine smile. "Yes, ma'am. We'll get it done." Hannah turned back to Cal. "You're right about one thing. I don't know this business yet, but I'm learning. And while I'm learning, I'm going to make decisions based on what's right for our clients and our employees, not what's convenient or profitable in the short term. If that's not how you want to operate, you're welcome to sell me your 49% and leave." Cal's face went through a series of expressions: rage, disbelief, calculation. Finally, he leaned in close, his voice a harsh whisper. "You have no idea what you've just done. No idea what you're up against." "Then I guess I'll find out." Hannah met his eyes without flinching. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She turned her back on him, a deliberate gesture of dismissal, and returned to the blueprints. After a long, tense moment, She heard Cal's footsteps retreating, heard the door to the office area slam. Tom let out a long breath. Mrs. Reed, that took guts, or stupidity. Hannah's hands were shaking so badly she had to set down the blueprints. I'm not sure which yet. Guts, Tom said firmly. Mr. Whitmore has been trying to cut corners and squeeze profits ever since Mr. Reed got sick last year. Your husband fought him on it, but toward the end, when Owen was too weak to come in regularly, Cal started making decisions on his own. Bad decisions. We've lost 2 good clients because of rushed work and missed deadlines. The men have been worried about where this place was headed. Hannah looked around the shop, at the faces watching her with cautious hope. Tom, I need you to be honest with me. Can this business survive without Cal? Tom considered the question carefully. Cal handles sales and client relations. He's good at that, charming, persuasive, but the actual work, the quality, the reputation, that's all us. And honestly, ma'am, if you're willing to learn and to trust the people who know what they're doing, I think we'd be better off without him. Then let's find out. Hannah picked up her phone and dialed the number on Arthur Vance's business card. He answered immediately. Mrs. Reed, I need to know how to legally remove a minority partner from a business. Her voice was steady, certain, and I need to know today. There was a pause. Then Arthur's voice came back with what might have been approval. I'll make some calls. Can you meet me at your house in an hour? Yes, good. And Hannah, you're swimming. Keep going. The line went dead. Hannah looked at Tom, at the other workers who'd gathered closer to hear the conversation. All right, Tom, I need you to walk me through every current contract, every pending order, every client relationship. I need to understand exactly what we're committed to and what we need to deliver. Can you do that? Absolutely. Tom was already moving toward the office. Jess has all the files organized. We can go through everything. For the next hour, Hannah immersed herself in the details of the business. She learned about the client's construction companies, agricultural operations, industrial facilities, and the types of work they needed. She learned about the equipment, the materials, the costs and profit margins. She learned about the employees, their skills, their concerns, their ideas for improving operations. And as she learned, something remarkable happened. The fear that had been choking her since yesterday began to transform into something else. Not confidence, exactly. She was still terrified, still overwhelmed, but purpose, direction, the sense that she was finally, for the first time in 15 years, doing something that mattered, something that was hers. When she finally left the shop to meet Arthur, Tom walked her to her car. Mrs. Reed, I just want to say, what you did today, standing up to Mr. Whitmore like that, showing up and asking questions instead of just signing papers and walking away, ... Mr. Reed would have been proud. Hannah felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. Thank you, Tom. That means more than you know. She drove home through the pale afternoon light, her mind racing with information, plans, possibilities. When she arrived, Arthur's dark blue sedan was already in the driveway. He was waiting on her front porch, briefcase in hand, and when he saw her, he studied her face for a long moment. You went to the shop, I did, and I think I'm going to fire my business partner. Hannah unlocked the door and led him inside. Tell me how to do it legally. Arthur set his briefcase on the kitchen table and pulled out a folder. I spoke with a business attorney I know. Here's the situation. As majority owner, you have the right to make operational decisions, including hiring and firing employees. However, Cal isn't an employee, he's a partner. You can't fire him, but you can buy him out. With what money? Hannah sank into a chair. I don't have the capital to buy his 49%. You don't have to buy all of it at once. According to the partnership agreement, if one partner wishes to dissolve the partnership, the business must be independently appraised, and the departing partner must be paid fair market value for their share. either in a lump sum or in installments over no more than 5 years. Arthur slid a document across the table. You can force a buyout. It will be expensive and you'll be making payments for years, but it's doable. Hannah read through the document, her heart sinking at the numbers. Even with installment payments, buying out Cal would strain the business finances severely. What if I can't make the payments? Then the business goes into receivership and gets sold to pay the debts. You lose everything. Arthur's voice was matter of fact, not cruel but honest. This is the risk, Hannah. This is what choosing yourself looks like in practical terms. It's not just cutting your hair and feeling empowered. It's making hard decisions with real consequences. Hannah thought about the shop, about Tom and Mike and David and Carlos, about the elderly people in the senior living facility who needed climate control, about the woman she'd been yesterday and the woman she was becoming. Do it. Start the buyout process. Arthur nodded slowly. All right, I'll have the attorney draw up the paperwork. But Hannah, you need to understand something. Cal isn't going to go quietly. He's going to fight this. He'll try to sabotage the business, turn clients against you, make your life hell. Are you prepared for that? No. Hannah met his eyes. But I'm doing it anyway. Something shifted in Arthur's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. Then you're going to need help. Real help, not just legal advice. You need someone who can teach you to read people the way I do, to see the manipulation before it happens, to protect yourself from the psychological warfare Cal is going to wage. Will you teach me? The question came out before Hannah could second-guess it. Arthur was silent for a long moment, his steel grey eyes searching her face. Finally he nodded. Yes, but not because I'm a consultant you're paying. Because I believe you're at a turning point that matters, and I want to see what happens when someone actually has the courage to change. Over the next 2 weeks, Hannah's life transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined. Arthur became a constant presence, teaching her to observe body language, to recognize manipulation tactics, to trust her own perceptions instead of doubting them. He sat in on meetings with clients, pointing out the subtle signs of honesty or deception. He helped her review contracts, explaining the hidden meanings in legal language. He taught her to recognize when someone was trying to anchor her back into old patterns of submission. And slowly, painfully, Hannah learned to swim. The buyout papers were served to Cal on a cold morning in late January. He showed up at the shop an hour later, his face purple with rage, screaming threats and accusations. Hannah, with Arthur standing quietly beside her and Tom and the other workers backing her up, simply handed him a formal letter terminating his access to the premises and requiring him to communicate only through attorneys. Cal's parting words were venomous. You'll be bankrupt in 6 months. And when you are, I'll buy this place for pennies and erase every trace of you. But 6 months later, Reed, Fabrication and Rescue, LLC. Hannah had changed the name. Removing Cal's name entirely was not only surviving, but growing. The rush job for Mountain West Climate Control had led to more contracts. Tom's expertise and the workers' craftsmanship had earned them a reputation for quality and reliability. And Hannah, who'd spent 15 years being told she was incapable of understanding business, discovered she had a talent for it, not for the technical fabrication work, but for understanding people, for building relationships with clients, for creating a workplace where skilled craftsmen wanted to stay. She also discovered something else. She could draw again. Late at night, after long days at the shop, she'd pull out her old sketchbooks and lose herself in color and line and form. And one evening, looking at a particularly detailed drawing of the shop's floor, she had an idea. Custom metalwork didn't have to be purely functional. It could be artistic, beautiful. She started designing decorative pieces, railings, gates, sculptures that combined Tom's fabrication skills with her artistic vision. The first piece, a flowing abstract sculpture for a local park, earned them recognition and opened an entirely new market. By the end of the year, Reed Fabrication and Rescue was profitable enough to make the buyout payments to Cal comfortably. Hannah had hired 2 more workers and was considering expanding the shop, and every morning when she looked in the mirror at her short hair, she'd kept it cropped. Liking the freedom and the constant reminder of the choice she'd made, she saw a woman she recognized, a woman who'd cut the anchor and learned to swim. On a bright afternoon in early December, almost a year after Owen's funeral, Hannah stood in the shop watching Carlos weld a section of decorative railings she'd designed. Arthur Vance appeared in the doorway, as he sometimes did, checking in on her progress. "You're still swimming," he observed. Hannah smiled. "Some days it feels more like drowning, but yes, I'm still swimming." "Good." Arthur walked over to examine the railing, running his fingers along the smooth curves of the design. "You know, when I first saw you at that funeral, I wasn't sure you'd make it. The conditioning was so deep, the fear so ingrained. I thought there was maybe a 20% chance you'd actually follow through. What changed your mind?" "The hair." Arthur looked at her, his steel gray eyes warm for once. "Not the act of cutting it, but what it represented. You didn't just trim it or style it differently. You shaved it off completely. That told me you weren't interested in half measures or compromise. You were willing to go all the way, to completely destroy the old version of yourself, to make room for the new one. That kind of commitment is rare." Hannah touched her head, the gesture now one of pride rather than self-consciousness. "It was the scariest thing I'd ever done. Scarier than confronting Cal, scarier than taking over the business, because it made the change visible, undeniable. I couldn't hide behind it or pretend I was still the same person." "Exactly." Arthur smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. "You know what the real lesson is, Hannah? The one I've learned from watching you this past year." "What?" "Change your mindset. Life will change. I said that to you at the funeral, and I meant it. But what I didn't fully understand then was how literal it is. The moment your mind shifts, the moment you truly decide to see yourself differently, reality has no choice but to rearrange itself around that new perception. You didn't succeed because you learned fabrication or business management. You succeeded because you stopped believing the lie that you were incapable. Everything else followed from that." Hannah looked around the shop at the workers, at the equipment, at the beautiful railing taking shape under Carlos's skilled hands. "I almost didn't do it. I almost signed Cal's papers and let him take everything. If you hadn't been there, someone else would have been," Arthur interrupted gently. "Or something else would have happened to wake you up. Because you were ready, Hannah. You'd been ready for years. You just needed permission to act on it. And sometimes that permission has to come from outside, from someone who can see you more clearly than you see yourself." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the work continue around them. Finally, Arthur picked up his briefcase. "I should go. I have a consultation in Meridian this afternoon." "Arthur," Hannah stopped him. "Thank you for everything. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For teaching me to swim. You taught yourself to swim." Arthur's voice was firm. "I just pointed you toward the water. The rest was all you." After he left, Hannah returned to her office, small room she'd created in the corner of the shop, with a desk, a computer, and walls covered with blueprints and sketches. She sat down and pulled out her phone, scrolling through the photos she'd taken over the past year. The shop floor on her first day, when everything had seemed overwhelming and impossible. The first completed custom order under her sole ownership. The decorative railing that had opened new markets. The team photo from last month. Everyone smiling, proud of what they'd built together. And one photo from the day after the funeral. Her reflection in the salon mirror, head shaved, eyes wide with terror and determination. A woman standing at the edge of an abyss and choosing to jump. Hannah set down the phone and picked up a pencil, pulling a fresh sheet of paper toward her. She had an idea for a new designer sculpture for the shop's entrance, something that would represent transformation, courage, the moment when everything changes. She began to sketch, her hand moving with confidence, creating something that had never existed before. Outside, the winter sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The shop was warm, filled with the sounds of work and purpose and life being lived on her own terms. The anchor was gone, and she was swimming. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt trapped by someone else's expectations, or conditioned to believe you're less capable than you truly are, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that challenge you to see yourself differently, to question the invisible chains you might be wearing, and to discover the courage to cut your own anchors. Like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that change is possible, that transformation is real, and that the life you want begins the moment you decide to stop living by someone else's rules. Thank you for listening.